Thank you, Kim, and gentlemen, welcome to the Honolulu Defense Forum, also known as the Kim Lin Honolulu Marathon. We're just rounding the corner in Hawaii Kai, heading back toward the finish line, but we still have miles to go before we sleep. You may not be surprised to know that Congress has come up a few times during our discussions in the last day or so, not always in vain, but but what struck me as I looked at both of your bios is that both of you were practitioners before you were politicians. Don spent 30 years in the Air Force. Pat had 2 tours on the ground in Iraq. So I think you bring a special knowledge to the House Armed Services Committee. And I wanted to just start with a general question as to, what are your views on where the committee is, where it's going, how will that impact the Indo-Pacific area, and what are the special insights having come from the operations field into the political arena? So, Congressman Ryan, maybe we'll start with you.
In a very congressional way, I feel like we should start with the chairman of my subcommittee, but I'm happy to go first. Why don't you go first?
I'll just critique you. Go ahead.
All right, I tried. I do also just want to shout out another one of our colleagues, Ed Case, who I see here, who represents this area, who's also very invested in the defense space as a defense appropriator. So good to see you, sir. Thanks for having us here. Yeah, this is only my second time in Hawaii, by the way, so I did not get the memo on not wearing a suit. Next time, I will not make that mistake. You can pick both Don and I out here very easily. And now I know what Aloha Crisp is. I now know what that is. So I got to go shopping tonight. I think we're going to cover a lot of this in depth, but at a high level, the thing I most took from my time serving, I was an Army intelligence officer, is the urgency component, and frankly, the frustration that quickly for me became infuriation as an infantry battalion S2 deployed in Iraq without the stuff I needed to protect my soldiers and my unit to accomplish the mission we had, and that was back in the early 2000s. And so many of the problems we talked about then, we're still talking about now. We've made a lot of headway on, and really almost to a person looking around this room, so many people have been instrumental to that, but it is so far from where we need to be in terms of changing the culture. So I'm sure we'll talk about legislation and authorities, but to me, my focus is on how do we in Congress help drive cultural change, particularly within the Pentagon, to see the urgency, to up the risk tolerance, and to get what we need to the ground level, to whether it's Admiral Paparo, whose remarks yesterday were so important and I think drove that urgency. So, and then just in queuing up my bipartisan partner in crime, I do think it's important to say on these issues in particular, we have a real opportunity space politically, I think, in the new administration to drive these issues of defense innovation. In a lot of other places, we're going to battle each other, which is frustrating to me. But in this space, I think there's real opportunity. And I'm excited to have Mr. Bacon here as the chair of this subcommittee because I think he's going to drive that for us. So thanks again for having me.
Thank you, Pat, and thank you, Chairman. I appreciate being up here with you. And it's fun to be out here because I did serve 30 years in the Air Force. I recognize so many of you, like I saw General Stilwell out here recently. Walk around, you see a lot of friends that I served with, right? And Ed Case is one of the best folks to work across the aisle, particularly on budget issues. And I brag on him a lot. And I got to point out one of my chairmen when I was with the new guy in the House, Mac Thornberry. Love seeing him here as well. And Pat, we do serve on a subcommittee that I think is very bipartisan. Cyber, electronic warfare, AI, and IT innovations is not a partisan issue. Now, we have disagreements, but it does not break down along Democrat-Republican lines. You have, whether it's, we're talking about, should cyber be a unique service? You have a few Democrats and a few Republicans who feel that way. You have a few Republicans, a few Democrats who don't agree, right? So it's more about a judgment and debating the pros and cons, but we do have an opportunity to get a lot of things done. I came into this subcommittee chair with 3 priorities. However, I didn't want to just be the chairman's priorities. I want to reflect Pat's priorities. I work with Rokana, he's the ranking member. We work with a great staff, this is what they do. So we're still putting together the final blueprint of what we want to get done. But here's the 3 things that I think we need to get done in this subcommittee. 1, China is eating our box lunch on cyber. They're into our infrastructure, they're into our cell phones. I can just go on and on. And what are we doing about it? You can't just play defense. I did missile defense in Israel. You don't want to play just defense. You got to be able to put a few warheads down in the places that are shooting those missiles at you, right? So you got to be able to return fire. I feel like we're taking face shots and we're not returning face shots back. So I think we need to discuss the policy that's restricting cyber command and doing some of the things that China is doing to us. And we can try to push the administration to change policy. This policy is not congressionally driven right now, it's more executive branch driven, but we can push them and say, hey, we need to be more assertive because we want to restore deterrence. And by the way, these are not in priority order. I have 3 priorities, but they're all, to me, top priorities. Secondly, going on 9 years in the HASC, I served 30 years. When I'm at the operational level, you just get stuff done, right? You get a mission, you get her done. What I find working with the Pentagon right now and sitting in the capacity that we're in, there's a lot of talk. We're planning on this. We're working this plan. We're studying this. We're doing some manpower changes over here. And it's just talk, talk, talk. Where is the new capability that we're putting out? We got to push the Pentagon to produce capability and combat capability. Too much talk, and I'll say this in the electronic warfare realm. I'm the electronic warfare. Tons of great plans and discussions, but what new capabilities are we putting out there that can counter China and Russia? This electronic warfare fight in Ukraine is real. So our job, I believe, is to push capability. And stop all the think tank stuff that goes on, right? So that's number 2. 3, and this gets to what we're doing here today. The Pentagon, by and large, has a culture that relies on the primes, relies on, very challenged in getting out to like the private sector, that's the off-the-shelf technology, the things that Silicon Valley's working on and other, the software that's out there. And we got to break the code. The Pentagon, or whether at the joint level or service level, we got to change the culture where we look to the outside sector for the software advancements, and we're not doing it. We got DIU that's doing a great job, but that's the exception. It's got to be the standard, and we got to build that standard in each of the services and within the COCOM. So those are the 3, I think, priorities that I bring to the table. I think we'll have some more as we work both parties into this, but that's what I want to focus on.
Thank you. Let's talk, if we can, about innovation. You were quoted, Congressman Bacon, in a recent op-ed, quote, Congress, industry, and the executive branch need to stop hiding behind the word innovation and actually start producing systems. Can you sort of dig a little deeper into that, particularly since we have all 3 represented here?
There is no doubt that we're good at finding innovations and some new ideas, but we're having a hard time fielding that at a level that will have an impact, and say in a fight with China or a fight with Russia, wherever it may be. So we got to get beyond just good ideas and figure out how we get them fielded. So that's, and back to my original comments, there's a lot of talk. We got to figure out how to get things into mass production and get things fielded at the unit level, at a level that makes a difference. And there's a lot of areas that I focus on. I think the number 1 area, it's software. We produce the best hardware in the world, and I love the F-35. I've worked with the Israeli pilots. They are stunned by what it can do beyond what they thought it could do. However, the software is behind. And we have people in the private sector that can do intelligence mission data at a level that is better than many of our primes can do. So we got to be able to figure out how do we partner better between the primes and folks who excel at software. And so that's an area that I think we got to work on. AI. I think the private sector is way ahead of anybody else on AI. We got to be able to figure out how to incorporate that into the DoD. But to your point, Chairman, innovations does not do anything if you can't field them. We got to figure out how to field them.
Congressman Ryan, essentially the same question.
Yeah, just to build on that, I mean, I think a lot of us here have seen, and I didn't coin this term, but I think it's the best articulation I've heard, innovation theater. Everybody knows that that's where dollars are following and political interest follows, but so much of that, even if the intentions are good, is not connected to really the needs of warfighters and combatant commanders. I mean, you heard, I wasn't here, but I read the transcript of Admiral Paparo yesterday. He so clearly can articulate where he sees the adversary, what the needs are, what his sort of operational concept is. And yet, if you look at what we're doing and where dollars are flowing and where programs of record are and even where leaders' attention is, it is nowhere near in alignment there, which is incredibly scary and dangerous given, again, the urgency moment that we're at. So I think one of our roles, or at least as I see it, is often people think of Congress as you come before Congress to get a browbeating, and I guess that feels good in the moment, but I think it's actually really become part of the problem that's reinforced risk aversion rather than bringing forward examples of success and championing those who took sort of political risk or took contractual risk or took even military or operational risk in order to solve the higher order needs to deter adversaries. I think we should be doing more of that, of shining a light on positive examples rather than just beating folks up.
Great. One of the terms that I've learned in listening to all of this is innovation by subtraction. How do you remove some of the roadblocks? From your standpoint, what are the things we need to get rid of? What are the roadblocks that are standing in the way of innovation and of getting these systems on the table?
I'll critique him again.
You notice I go first on the hard ones, and he...
Gives me time to think.
Well, look, I am far from the expert. There are a lot of people here with a lot more experience on this, but I think we all kind of know the broad answer, which is we've just added so many layers and so many processes and so many ways to get to know and sort of disaggregate our acquisition and contracting and even R&D from warfighter needs, particularly at the ground level. So easy to say, very hard to do. How do we start to peel away those layers? One way to do it is sort of a destructive way, which would be find those problems, sort of cut them out or remove them. That's slow and really tough in a, unfortunately, very culturally conservative bureaucratic organization like the Pentagon. I think the way to do this is create sort of a vanguard of success that has been able to either break through or work around or patch together hacks around our systems, and then champion that, support that, create political room for those entities to take risk. So if you have a lot of innovation theater, there are entities really doing it very, very well. Don talked about the DIU. I think that's a really great example, and I know many people in the room have been part of growing that. And when I talk to people out in the field, and I say, who's really helping you ultimately solve your operational needs? It's almost every single time, well, DIU was able to make this happen for me somehow. And that's incredibly valuable. And how do we sort of protect and enable and scale that? And the last thing I just say, Congress had to push the Pentagon to reinforce DIU. We were the ones who upped the budget, not the Pentagon, which is, I'm trying not to curse more these days, so I'm not going to say what I was thinking, but it's incredibly frustrating. But again, that's a constructive role that I think we can play. So I think we have the path. We've just got to, and I'm sorry, the final thing on this, I'm very worried that in an inevitable moment of administration transition, that we lose momentum where we have had success. And I get it, you come in new, you want to, if I didn't do it, it has to be inherently bad. We've all been through that when we've changed command or taken over a new thing. But there's real success and momentum, and we cannot afford to have any blinks or any pauses where we do have that success. So that's something I think we can help on from a congressional level to push that.
One of the nice things about being a chair of a subcommittee, it's nice to be able to take the good ideas of the whole team and make them part of the team's thing. And I'll embrace Pat's suggestion. We should celebrate the successes and focus on that more. We will do that. I think it's a great idea. And I also second DIU under Mr. Becker's been doing great work. We want to keep that momentum. In fact, we want to build on that momentum and make it faster and better. And so that's the goal. So, you know, I was a 5-time commander. My first command, I inherited a squadron that I dearly loved. I grew up in it. But it was always the last place squadron of 25 squadrons on base. Never won a competition. It was like the bad news bears of units. And when I was a lieutenant colonel, that commander got fired. They said, Don, you're going over to the squadron, which excited me because that's the squadron I grew up in. But I knew too, we got to change the culture. Where I'm going with this, it is hard to change culture. And the DoD has a culture today, they're used to doing procurement in a certain way. And this is all they knew when they were lieutenants or E1s, and they've worked themselves up. This is all they know, and you're violating their, what they've always known, how they're supposed to do business. And you're undermining many of these organizations, their leverage, because you're going to try to make DIU relevant in all the services, and that undermines. So this is what we're contending with, and it's really hard to change a culture, and especially when you got inertia driving you one direction when you know you got to make a 090 degree heading change, and it's hard. And so you got to build on. When I did as a squadron commander, you build on small successes. I think that gets to what Pat was saying. I think how we can make the biggest impact, to your question, and it's something that Mr. Becker and I were just talking about earlier today. DIU has had expanded funding. We want to grow it even more. But we got to make this concept relevant in all of the services. They need to have a pot of money, whether it's 5% of their procurement, we can debate what that number should be, that allows them to buy off-the-shelf technology this year. And then Congress has to put a spotlight what they're doing, and so that doesn't just go in a default mode of what they've always done. But we got to make it part of the culture. And so what we got to do now is expand the budget authorities of services to do off-the-shelf capabilities that they need right now, that 3 or 4 years from now will be out of date. And by the way, companies can't wait 3 or 4 years to get paid either, right? So we got to break this down. But I think that's the one thing that we can do in this subcommittee is work on this concept, because it's one of our 3 goals. One of my 3 goals: how do you get commercial technology faster? We got to figure out how to do it.
Good. I wanted to sort of go into solutions, so you've worked very nicely into that. But what are, from your perspective, some of the successes that we've seen, and what are the lessons that we've learned from them that we can apply more broadly? And let me start with you this time, so then Pat can correct you.
So what are the successes that we've seen? Well, I've been out to a lot of the private companies, and one of the things that it strikes me that they're very far ahead that the Pentagon and the services need to take advantage of, and I mentioned it earlier, intelligence mission data. So, like, for example, if you're not familiar with that term, if you got a T-72 tank and you want your systems to identify it without a human in the loop, you got to take like 1,000 pictures of it so that the computer can identify the T-72, and it says T-72's over there. The private sector knows how to do that better than how we know how to do it, and our weapon systems need that capability in many cases. So we got to do a better partnering with the private sector and taking this technology into our weapon systems. It's just one case in point. I think AI is another area that we got to leverage. Autonomous capability, I think the private sector is way ahead of us where we're at with the military, and we got to leverage that as well. But if you see what the future plans are, whether it's Replicator and other, those are not necessarily successes right now, but I believe they will be the successes 2 and 3 years from now when we get that capability fielded. He's pretending his mic's off so he can't talk.
I'm an Army guy. This technology is very difficult for me, the on-off switch. Yeah, I agree with what Don said. I think some specific examples that are encouraging to me, one that I don't think we talk enough about is actually some of the progress we've made, both with the Pentagon and in Congress on talent and human capital as always one of America's true great advantages that I think sometimes we make secondary or even tertiary, where so much of the success of getting smart technologists and engineers into the right places to be advising commanders, to be driving innovation at all the different levels of where things get stuck. That's gotten dramatically better. And that was a lot of that, not all of it, but a lot of it was specifically driven by small legislative changes. An amendment to the National Defense Authorization Act that we worked with folks in this room to tweak hiring authorities and retention authorities. Those things make a huge difference in empowering and enabling commanders and other leaders, and that's relatively low-hanging fruit, I think, in terms of driving and reinforcing change and success, so we want to do more of that. I do think, not perfect, certainly, and we can all have a good, healthy critique, but I think overall the replicator initiative and the one willingness of Kath Hicks, to her credit, to by name take accountability for a high-risk move and say, I'm putting my name to this thing, I'm going to drive it through, which folks that have worked in the Pentagon a long time tell me that's kind of what it takes to truly drive something like that. I think that alone is success. Starting to see that through multiple cycles be refined and us actually deliver at least significantly closer to truly attritable commercial off-the-shelf capabilities to meet the needs of, not only, of course, Admiral Paparo and Indo-PACOM, but other combatant commanders who are saying, this is what I need, I'm still not getting it. And I think that's something that, again, I'm a little concerned that the politics or the egos in an administrative change of administration could put that at risk. And I think, hey, if you want to call it something else, fine. But I think those kinds of programs and moves are examples of success, that we need to reinforce.
Great. I want to get on in a minute to Congressman Bacon's comment about the Chinese eating our lunch, but I want one last question on this financing thing. Someone earlier in the conference who knows a little bit about the Congress mentioned flexible funding as one of the solutions. Now, understanding that's more an appropriator's question than yours, where do you come down on that, and how likely is something like that to come about?
Yeah, I'm only in my third year in Congress, so I'm still figuring all this stuff out too, but I think the common sense logical thing is to give power down authority to the person who's closest to the problem. We all do that and want to do that, but we have done the opposite to an incredibly excruciating degree in how we do our defense budgeting. So flexible spending, I think the key thing is it's a two-way street. We're going to give you flexibility to assume risk. There has to be some easy, low-friction way to share updates then in a space of trust around what are we doing with those, are they working or not. But I think that's a no-brainer and relatively low-hanging fruit. But I know I'm far from ever being near being an appropriator, but I know they sometimes have different feelings on that.
By the way, I totally agree with him. We got to expand that flexible budgeting for all of our services. And I won't say anymore because I've said it a couple times already. Ed Case, you're an appropriator, though, aren't you? I have to say, get off my case, Ed Case.
So the solution is Ed Case, and we're delighted to have you here with us. And,
ultimately, it always is the solution appropriate.
Great. All right. Well, let's go to Chinese eating our lunch. What technologies do either or both of you believe are necessary in order for to be prepared for a potential fight with China?
Well, let me start off big picture. We're spending 2.9% of our GDP on defense. It's inadequate. That's the lowest we've been spending since 1940. It's not enough to modernize the three legs of our triad, do fifth and sixth generation fighters. It is embarrassing that we're producing 1.2 attack submarines a year. That's unacceptable. If I'm president or SecDef or we're in the HASC, we got to fix that. It's not adequate in deterring China. We just got to be candid about it. The level we're spending and what we're putting out in capabilities are not good. The most important thing we can do right now is deter China from invading Taiwan. How do we do that? Well, we owe approximately $10 billion in weapons right now to Taiwan. We're behind. And I don't want to be too tough on the previous administration, but when I talked to the Secretary of Defense, I said, what are we doing to get $10 billion? Because we owe them, and it's vital to deterrence. He goes, well, we're studying it. That's inadequate. The business as usual is unacceptable. And so what does Taiwan need right now? They need sea mines. They need the anti-shipping missiles, name elude me right now, but you know what I'm talking about. Yeah, harpoons, thank you, Admiral. But we need harpoons, either long-range missile defense, long-range air defense, and those are the things that we got to be giving to Taiwan now. By the way, watching the challenge of Russia invading Ukraine, that's got to scare China. They thought, Ukraine's going to fall in 2 weeks. 750,000 casualties later, Russia's made very small gains. That's got to scare China, but we got to do more than that. We got to get those weapons to China or to Taiwan now. Now, on capabilities, what new capabilities? Obviously, the swarming and massive drone capability will be vitally important in stemming an invasion. I think it's in deterring an invasion. Autonomous type vehicles and autonomous platforms, also very critical. So I think those are the two newer technologies that we got to field, but there's a lot that we can be doing now with sea mines, harpoons, long-range air defense, and we have to get that stuff there ASAP.
Just to build on that, I think it's always good and important to talk at the platform level, but I think one of the places that they're eating our lunch is we're thinking individual platforms or pieces of hardware. They're thinking capabilities tied to a real strategy of decades of studying up on us. And I think, I know from many of the discussions you all have been having, that's the centerpiece to us really fundamentally rethinking, do we have the right concepts first? Then we talk about, let's build capabilities, and the way that I think this can operationalize, for example, and back to our previous conversation, going from programs of records to actual portfolios where a multi-year ability to know I'm going to generally need this, but there's no way I can know in 5 years exactly what I'm going to need now. I mean, that's just, again, I know I'm preaching largely to the choir here, but I think in a good way that has become the general sense of the Congress, or at least the sense of the Armed Services Committee, in a way that it wasn't before. So again, just not to repeat, I agree with all what Don said on the platforms as well, but I think that should be sort of the where we end, not where we start. And that's, I think, ultimately why we feel behind, or at least quite reactive to the PRC.
Great. Well, I want to give some time now for the audience.